So I love to open these interviews by doing some internet digging on the people that I'm going to be talking to. And by the way, I did go through both of your Instagrams, but you guys aren't like, are you not big Instagram users?
Not really, no.
Yeah, I'm like married with 2 kids, and I don't even know if I've posted about any of those things.
Are you on TikTok? Like, what are you on? What's your social media app?
I mean, Instagram, for me, it is Instagram. I don't use it a lot. I don't use it a lot, but for anyone who's following me, I'll throw the odd story on there for whatever's happening in my life.
Okay, I saw beautiful photos on both, but some of them I was like, this I don't think you've posted. Some of them were like since 2022. So anyway, I went to YouTube and I found this is from the trailer actually of the Into the Light documentary. And one of the lines, I'm just going to ask you to speak to it, that I found that I really appreciated was somebody said, and they were talking about obviously pornography, which is what the conversation we're going to have today, was essentially that it does not define you. They said, this does not define you. And I'd like you both to speak to that. What is the difference between, actually, let me see. Can you answer me this question? How do you guys, and maybe you already talked about this in the documentary, but what is the difference between a person who has watched porn and a person who is a porn addict? How do you define that? How would you have our listener who's listening define that? And then what would you say to someone listening right now who feels like this label of porn user or porn addict, they just feel like it is defining them? How would you speak to that?
Yeah, I mean, there's a ton packed into that question, right? Addiction language can get hard. You know what I mean? So when you go, and it kind of depends on how you want to view it. So if you want to talk about addictions proper, there's a field, there's research in there. I would argue, and you can debate this. I would argue that we can classify pornography as an addiction in some cases, not all, but sometimes, because it's just I mean, people who have experienced pornography, it's hard. There's that pull to always go back to it. Some of the data out there, Your Brain on Porn by Gary Wilson is an excellent book on this, where he makes the case that pornography can be really addictive. But just like pornography addiction, just like many other addictions, like many other struggles, like many other sins, there's never a place for us to define ourselves by that. If you're saved, you're redeemed by the blood of Christ, your identity rests in the work of Christ. No ifs, no buts. And so there's a place, our whole documentary is built around addressing this sin of pornography, but it's never from condemnation. It's always from a place of, listen, that has been dealt with by Jesus. Let's move forward and actually work through this problem, because there's hope at the end of this.
Did you want to speak to that, John Michael, as well?
Yeah, I mean, I'd just add that's part of the origin story of our documentary Into the Light. Is we felt the conversation was so often focused on don't do that, this is wrong, this is sinful, which is true, but also the conversation seemed to stop there, and we're like, hey, we're as believers in Christ, we have the hope, the only hope, and we have the greatest joy and identity that we can offer to the person who's struggling, who's caught by an addiction. And we want to move beyond just saying it's wrong and offering the hope as well, like Jake was saying. And that's what our documentary does.
I am so encouraged to hear both of you say that. As somebody, we were talking a little bit before we started recording, but as somebody who sits with college students all the time, and I'm just older, so I don't think, I mean, maybe I'm also like was sheltered and naive or whatever, but because like my husband, he never watched porn, and it's not that he's like such a great person. It's that literally you had to go to a video store and look the lady in the eye and say, I would like this video, and then rent it. And that just was not going to happen in our time. But now, obviously, children and young people, my students have all grown up with cell phones that are in their possession at all times in their room. It's not even like there was a family computer anymore, like when I grew up, which makes just so much more access. And so I think it's, as I sit with young people, I'm always, I don't know, I worry about this generation because it feels like, actually, maybe you guys can speak to this. It feels like there's so many beautiful, wonderful, smart people that are walking away from church, and more specifically, what's important to me is church community, because of shame, and messages like that. So I guess could both of you, before we get into some of the stuff in the documentary, could you just share a little bit about your own stories that led you to create a documentary like this?
Yeah, I mean, I can jump in by saying I grew up in a Christian home with parents who love the Lord, and even in a family like that, that kind of context, I came across porn when I was 8 years old. So what you're saying, we're in a different time where maybe the appetite was there before, but today we've got a multi-billion-dollar industry that's actually actively pursuing and looking to disciple families and kids at 8 years old. And I am one of those people who was addicted for almost 10 years, and felt that shame, felt a lot of that fear of talking to people, some of which was self imposed, some of which was a bit of the culture of that. But by God's grace, I did get to spend some time with some older guys who were real about where they were struggling, and that the Lord really used that to encourage me and to give me a place where I felt able to open up to them and talk about my struggle. And I kept it hidden that whole time. Guilt, shame, all of that cycle going on. And it wasn't until I was around some guys who talked about being broken, not perfect, and were confessing sin to each other, that I felt able to open up. And that was when God worked change in my life. And over it was hard, but over years the Lord gave me freedom from that. And it started with people being willing to be broken with each other.
I had a similar yet distinct story in some ways. I grew up in an incredible Christian home, and my mom actually talked to me about the dangers of pornography from when I was really young. And so by her, consistent prayer and thoughtfulness on this, and by the grace of God, I never got hooked on porn proper. And for our age bracket, that's so rare. I have one friend, and I've had this conversation 1,000 times, who's never hooked on porn. And so that's a gift. I'm really grateful for that. But I had my own sin struggles, sexual sin struggles through being a teenager. And so, it took kind of the same thing, really thoughtful men in my life to really talk to me and walk me through some of these things, some good books. And so, and I had to break free from my own problems with sexual sin as well. And so, that kind of brought both of us to want to come to seminary. So we're in a seminary classroom right now. And so when I came here, I got to talk to a guy by the name of Tim Challies. And so he's an author, blogger. He wrote a book a while ago called
Sexual Detox.
Sexual Detox. And I asked him about the book, and he's like, he's got a great sense of humor. He's like, the book's fine. He's like, honestly, we've written better books since then. And so, I started talking with him, and he looked at me and he goes, it's interesting. We have this video problem of pornography, and in answer, we typically write books. So is there a place, he's just kind of musing, is there a place for a video-oriented resource to tackle this struggle of pornography? And I was just blown away by that. And so what Tim didn't know is that both I and John Michael have a history of film. And so I called John Michael and said, hey, bro, you have this story, I have this story. What would it look like for us to reach out to some of the authors and speakers and counselors who've meant so much to us and start assembling a team of speakers into a documentary? And so that kicked off a whole year and a half of fundraising, because one of our commitments was to offer it for free, which we can talk about, talking to a lot of women about like their journey, their struggle, and making sure women's voices were included in this. And then ultimately that led to earlier this year, we premiered Into the Light, and it's a teaching documentary that walks through that process of change, bondage and sin, all the way to freedom in Christ. And we made it as a resource for the person who's struggling, who's hurting, and needs hope. And so that's why we're here. And we're so grateful, just how God's used the documentary. And honestly, for you, for being willing to have us on and like talk about this, because it's a hard topic.